What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode right here on Pick Swap Media. It is another day closer to the NBA draft, which, of course, is one of the best times of the entire year. I continue to dive deeper into these prospects with my guy Ryan Coyle here, and today we were going to take a bit of a positional specific approach, talking about the wings in this year's draft class. So before we dive fully into it, Ryan, how's it going today?
Pretty good, man. Yeah, like you said, we're getting closer and closer. We're now I think this is our first episode together in June, so we're in draft month. I know I've got a handful more prospects to get into episode wise. I'm sure you do too. I think we probably by all said and done probably have about 50 or so individual prospect videos. So definitely a deep dive into this class, and I've been starting to get more and more into it because it seems like nobody really has a set list. It's kind of all over the place. So it's going to be cool to see how it actually pans out during the draft, and then look back 3-4 years later and see where these guys end up.
Yeah, definitely. And it feels like there's been a lot of movement lately as well, just all around in this draft. And honestly, a lot that I disagreed with that I am excited to rip the Band-Aid off and talk about here. So let's dive into the particular discussion today. We are going to rank the top 5 wings in this year's draft class. We're going to go 5 through 1, starting at the bottom and working our way up to the top. So Ryan, I'll throw it to you first here. Who is your number 5 wing in this year's NBA draft class?
Go with the local kid out of Philadelphia. I'm of Kentucky wing with this past year. Find some kid, only 20 years old. He is a bit of an older prospect, though. I think he turns 21 in October, but still, it's not like he's a seasoned veteran that just never really panned out. He was viewed, Justin Edwards, as the number 1 prospect in the draft on most boards entering the season. So I'm saying, why give up on him after 1 year at Kentucky, where we've seen time and time again guys at Kentucky kind of get lost in the shuffle and then pan out and have a better NBA career? Like Tyrese Maxey, he was not a superstar at Kentucky. Devin Booker even was like the 13th overall pick. I'm not saying Justin Edwards is going to pan out and be a star like one of those guys, but still, we've seen guys go to Kentucky, get lost in a really talented roster, and never really find a groove. We saw Justin Edwards a couple times have some really nice performances, but he's playing for minutes in a 10, 11-man rotation under Cal, where we've seen Cal kind of mismanage some guys there too. So we've seen this story before. Guys actually go out and be better NBA players in college. 6'7", super athletic wing. Still think he needs to put on some weight for sure, but all the tools, I think he could just use some seasoning. Another player where I kind of wish he went back for a little bit more of college playing time. Only played 21 minutes per game, but averaged a pretty solid 8.8 points per game, 37% from 3. In the right situation, I was talking to you about this yesterday, I think Justin Edwards could have a Nickeil Alexander-Walker type role, just be a super athletic type of wing, find his role kind of as like a 3-point corner specialist and just be like a defensive-minded player, give you good energy and spurts. Just too many tools, I think, for him not to find a role in this league. And another guy that we've talked about in numerous episodes where he's got that superstar kind of background from high school, McDonald's All-American pedigree. I think that's going to be really taken into account, and looking at the track record of some of these guys in Kentucky, I think he's going to wind up being a first-round pick, and I think he finds a nice spot in the league, but he does still need some work to his game. We're buying in on potential here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am with you from the standpoint of I do expect him to have a better pro career than his college career. That he stylistically, the way that he plays and in his game, I do think it translates more to the NBA level than what we saw in college. And then clearly him getting outplayed by some guys that kind of jumped off the map with Reed Sheppard, Rob Dillingham there, eating up a ton of the minutes that I think were likely expected to be Justin Edwards. That's going to be an interesting lottery ticket, and for whatever team tries to scratch it there. I'll be honest, I expected there to be more of a push to get Justin Edwards up in this draft throughout the pre-draft process. He was a guy that I kind of had labeled as a dude I expected to be a riser. I haven't quite seen that much buzz for him. That I think he hasn't done himself bad. I'm confident he will hear his name called. I think I still probably think it ends up in the second round. He strikes me as an early second round type of guy, maybe even middle of second round. But like I said, he was a guy that I expected that through the pre-draft process to elevate himself and kind of establish himself as a first round pick type guy. I don't know if I necessarily feel that is the case, but still a lot of time until the draft. So I'm with you. That is a guy that I think when we revisit this draft class, will have outperformed his draft slot by a pretty significant margin there. So good name there with Justin Edwards. And as you mentioned, can't go wrong taking a swing on a guard out of Kentucky there. To jump over to
also just one more thing at the end where we were talking about kind of he got kind of lost in some minutes there at Kentucky. But it's not like he was like a terrible player. He just really never really got into a full comfortable rhythm. I'm doing my player profile breakdown on him later, but I think it was 16 games he played 20 minutes or more. 11 of those he scored double figures. Like, so when he was actually given more of kind of a fair opportunity, a bit of a longer leash, he was able to go out there and produce. So I do think that the talent's there, and we could see a better NBA career down the line.
Yep, absolutely. And to switch gears and hop over to my number 5 here, a guy that we have basically at the exact opposite end of the spectrum here is Tristan da Silva. Comes in as my number 5 ranked wing in this class. Averaged 16 points per game, 5.1 rebounds, 2.4 assists, 1.1 steals, and shot 39.5% on 4.8 3-point attempts this season, this being his senior season. Spent all 4 years at Colorado. Measures in at 6'8.5". He's 23 years old with a 6'10" wingspan. He's the type of guy that I expect to be a day one contributor on an NBA team. That this isn't going to be a guy that you're waiting on the potential or waiting for him to develop. He is exactly who he is, and that's a guy that I do believe can play some high-level minutes on a contending team. There's the little things that the more I watch this guy jump out to me. He's a good connective passer, far better than the numbers indicate. He's a good entry pass maker, that he does do a good job, particularly like last year was getting the ball to Eddie Lampkin and playing through him a little bit. I do believe in the shot. I also think he's a really high IQ cutter that I think he does a really nice job. And with Lampkin specifically last year, they did some really nice things in the 2-man game where it was da Silva dishing the ball in, making an off-ball cut, and creating offense in that way. That's a really appealing and intriguing skill set for a wing to me. So da Silva's not going to be this guy that I think has this illustrious, accomplished career, but I do think that he's going to carve out a nice niche as like a 4th or 5th starter on a team, potential rotation player, and just have a really long, just solid NBA career. That to me is worth a swing. And from the Sixers perspective, absolutely worth it at 16 there.
Yeah, and that's my theme of the draft where we've talked about it multiple times, where I know I kind of was going off with of potential there with Edwards, but I think you got to be looking for sure things in this draft. If you have the roster to take a swing on a high potential guy, do that. But I do think Tristan da Silva is one of the probably 5 to 10 players out of this draft that you could throw into the playoffs, and you could see him making an impact in year one. I'm confident in his ability to step in with that experience. I think we've been seeing in the NBA too more recently. They're more likely, I guess, or more ambitious to take some of these veteran players that they know that can contribute from day one.
Yeah, it's been nice to kind of see the stigma on that change. That oftentimes that's looked at as such a negative thing. There's another guy that I'm going to get into on this list that I'm curious. I'm sure you likely have him as well. But the older guys are doing like looked at as being NBA ready in a way that I think in years past it was looked at as kind of a negative thing, that there wasn't more room to grow. So that's my pick for number 5. Who is your number 4 on this draft list?
All right, so my number 4, I'm going to be really surprised if you have this guy on your list at all, but I'm hitching my wagon to him as like one of my guys. I think he's going to be a late first, early second round pick, but I'm going with Harrison Ingram out of North Carolina, a player that I've been a fan of since he was coming out of high school. Stanford never really found a way to kind of unleash him, but this is a kid that has to be, super cerebral, a really smart kid to be able to go to Stanford and then transfer to North Carolina. So you don't have to worry about that. He's going to be a high IQ player for this team. And when he went to UNC, they finally found a way to unleash him. Another former McDonald's All-American. Like I said, I've been a fan of him since his day at Stanford. And then this year at North Carolina, you really saw what he could be when he has a good coaching staff around him and some good players around him too. He's an ideal NBA wing coming off the bench for you. I can see him going out there and playing and just kind of being like a dominant second rotation type of guy where he's never really a starter for you, but you never have to worry about a drop off when he comes off the floor. One thing I think with him that I'm a little concerned about is he's like a little heavy, still kind of has some of that baby weight to him. I think he needs to really kind of fill into his body a little bit more and turn that kind of chubby weight into some muscle. That's like my main issue with him. But he shot the ball a lot better this year at UNC, going on 38.5% on 4.5 attempts per game, averaged 12.2 points and 8.8 rebounds. So I love that rebounding ability, especially on a team that had Armando Bacot too, who averages double-digit rebounds. He showed the willingness to really compete with him on the glass. He had 17 games this year with double-digit rebounds, so a guy that really goes after it. Another former McDonald's All-American, which, as we just talked about with Edwards, I believe always plays a role in these teams' evaluation process. And in a draft where we've talked about looking for role players and rotational guys, I think Ingram is one of the safest options in the draft. Could be some lofty praise here for what Naz Reid has turned into, but give me a little bit of like a Naz Reid light with Harrison Ingram, where he can do a little bit of everything. He can shoot the ball. He can rebound really well. And he's even a pretty good passer too. So give me the Harrison Ingram stock. I think he's going to be looked back at as why did we let this guy slip? He's going to be a really good NBA player.
Yeah, I do not have Harrison Ingram in my top 5 wings in this year's class, but I do like the shout there. I am a fan of his game, and this is a little bit of kind of a weird shout here, but do you remember when Kevon Looney was in college playing for UCLA?
Yep.
I think there's a chance that Ingram takes a little bit of the Kevon Looney path. That when you watch Looney in college, like he was a pure wing. He was a guy creating his own shot, dribbling on the perimeter, shooting threes. You look at Kevon Looney now for the Warriors, that's a dude that is a straight up big man, that he's there being a dominant rebounder, that he still moves well for his size, but he for sure has adapted all the big man traits in his role. It would not shock me if Ingram trends more towards that path. I was surprised as you were speaking. I looked up the shooting numbers because in my head I was concerned about the shooting. He did do a nice job improving up to 38.5% this year, shot 31.9% and 31.3% the years prior. And even still, the free throw shooting went 66%, 59.8%, and 61.2%. So a little bit of a red flag there. But I agree with you. I think he's a high IQ player. I think he's a pretty good connector. The rebounding is certainly notable to me. So I think there's a world where he trends a little bit more towards the Kevon Looney career arc, but I do like him as a player, absolutely.
Yeah, one thing where it kind of caught me off guard too when I was doing a little bit more research into him, only measured in at 6'5" at the combine.
Nice.
I thought he was more of a 6'7", 6'8", but
Yeah.
still being able to rebound the ball that well at that size was still a little bit of added bonus for me. But it's going to be a little hard for him to match up with some of these guys. He's definitely. I thought there would be a path where maybe he plays some small ball 4 in the league, but I think he's going to have to be strictly, guarding threes. But that's kind of why I compared him to Naz Reid as well, where it's like Naz Reid is you just look at him more of just like a basketball player. I think he just fits that kind of positionless basketball type of mold.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me. That made me nervous that he measured at 6'5". I saw him listed at 6'8", and I thought he was at least that, to be perfectly honest. He plays big, absolutely.
Yeah, like he looks big out on the floor. It's like one of those, like, are we sure that this is right?
Yeah, but disappointing there. I'm sliding over to my number 4 pick here, and another guy that I'm coming from the opposite end of the spectrum from you. The guy that I think has been the most rapid riser of any player in this year's draft, that being Tijan Saloon is, I believe, how you pronounce this guy's name. It feels very similar to the archetype and just path that Bilal Coulibaly took last year with the Wizards, climbing up because he was still playing professionally while all these guys were going through the pre-draft process, playing actual live basketball against real deal competition and playing very well at that. That this year, averaging 9.7 points per game, 3.9 rebounds, 1.1 steal, shot 31.6% from 3 on 3.4 3-point attempts per game. He's a really high level athlete. He's 6'9". He's just 18 years old, a 7'1" wingspan. He moves incredibly fluidly. This is a guy that teams seem to be leaping up draft stock. That I think there's a pretty likely world at this point that this guy ends up a top 10 pick. And he was a guy that really wasn't on a ton of our radars until relatively recently. My concerns with him is he's a 70% free throw shooter, and he shot pretty poorly until this year. So I do think there's a chance this was a bit of an outlier shooting year for him, and it still wasn't that elite of a knockdown, that he still was hitting in the low 30s. He's also a bit of a sloppy passer, has a little bit of a thrill for the dramatic where he'll make a play or throw a pass that he probably shouldn't at times. But if you want to take a lottery ticket, this is everything you're asking for. That he's long, he's switchable, he's versatile, he's athletic. You can't teach the type of just combination of athleticism and movement that this guy possesses. And he is a good cutter and lob threat as well. So there's going to be ways to use this guy. I don't know how tapped in you are on him. Are you a believer in Saloon or a little bit skeptical?
Yeah, you said it best. We're not that tapped into him, and it's because I think he was one of those guys that I really didn't hear of until the past month or so. But over these last, I think, even 2 weeks to 10 days, I've seen his name in a bunch of top 10 mock drafts, but also top 10 big boards. It seems like people are really kind of buying in on the potential, and that's more so, I guess, a case of the lack of high-end talent from the American side or just college players in this draft, where it's like, all right, if maybe teams are kind of taking the alternate approach to what I'm saying, where it's like, all right, screw it, we might as well just take a swing for the fence and see if we can hit big. He might be one of those guys to do that, where it kind of comes out of nowhere. So if you're buying into the potential and you're in favor of that, sure, this is a good potential swing for you. But I'm just a little bit worried, especially with these guys that kind of come out of nowhere. Like, I know Luka and Wemby are different; they're generational type players, but like, you were aware of them, you knew of them for years, kind of coming in. Some of these foreign guys that are going to get drafted in the top 5, the top 10, that you really haven't heard their name besides for the past year or so. So a little bit concerning there for me, but it's also where you don't have that big of a track record with these players.
Yeah, and it is always the challenge of trying to compare the level of competition when you're watching these overseas guys versus college. Definitely have gone leaps and bounds improvement in that type of category, but still something to note there. For your number 3 wing in this year's NBA draft, who do you got, Beef?
All right, I'm gonna go with Ron Holland there from the G League Ignite. Another player that in his class, this past recruiting class, he opted to go to the G League route. I believe he was a Texas commit at one point. I think even he was in talks potentially going to Kentucky, but he winds up going to the G League. But another player that was in the top 5 in his recruiting class goes that Ignite route. And I feel like, when you do that and you're not playing on ESPN every time you're playing, you could get lost a bit in the media and draft scene. But still 6'8", 200 pounds. He didn't lose that height. He didn't lose that muscular frame over the span of a year. He just was out of the limelight a little bit. But averaged 19.5 points per game, 6.7 rebounds per game. So obviously those are pretty eye-popping numbers there. And 3.1 assists per game too. For a 6'8" wing that's considered more of a scorer, it shows ability to be, a pretty decent playmaker as well. And showing he's just not a one-trick pony. Pretty efficient from the field, 44.5% on 15 attempts per game. But then, as always, with these guys that are, superb athletes, really good at driving to the rim on the wing, then you get to the 3-point shot where he only shot 24% on about 3.5 attempts per game. So that's a major red flag in his game. But I think with him, kind of like what I was saying with Stephon Castle earlier in the guard segment, where Ron Holland has probably been the most explosive, most athletic player his entire life every time he stepped onto the basketball court. He probably hasn't really needed to rely on a 3-point shot until this year in the G League. So it's something that he's going to have to work on, going to have to develop. But if you believe in the talent, I don't know why you wouldn't believe it in the ability to become a better shooter. And with his ability, I think, to get to the rim and be a defensive stopper as well with that frame, I think that even if he shoots like 32, 33%, he could carve out a real nice career in the league. He's a really tough cover off the dribble. I think guys staying in front of him, that's a real struggle for some people, but he has real star potential. 2.5 steals per game as well. I think he could be a real good defensive playmaker at the next level. Can the shot come around? Ultimately, he's going to determine his ceiling just like most players.
Yeah, I'm with you. And to tip my hat here, I even have Ron Holland a slot higher at the number 2 wing in my mind. I think he's suffering from a little bit of G League Ignite prejudice here. That I think people are skeptical of the Ignite prospects. We know the track record at this point that it has not been this flawless, just step to the NBA that I think it was designed to be. Even guys like Jalen Green and Jonathan Kuminga, that has taken them more time. Scoot Henderson obviously has not popped or made that immediate impact in the way that I think many were expecting, or really what the Ignite was designed to create for these guys. So I think Holland's kept in that category, and we're letting our thoughts on previous prospects kind of infiltrate our brain a little bit when looking at Holland. But I'm with you that I think he is exactly who he's always been. He's a real deal high-level player. And what really jumps out to me about Holland specifically is I think from day one, he's going to be an impact defender, that he's a true switchable, at least 1 through 4. I even think you can get away with him with some centers, but he's tenacious. He's got a little like Tari Eason in him, the way that like 2.5 steals per game is crazy stuff that he produced this year. And he's willing to be that rugged, get in your face, be physical with you. And at his size, at his frame, that's going to translate. There's no doubt about it that he is real deal 6'8". Also still 18 years old, that this is a guy that you're taking for the potential, you're taking for the long term. He's been a guy that seems to be slipping down boards rather than the opposite, that I thought this was going to be a lock to be a top 10 pick. And it seems like the door might be open for him to fall deeper than that, which very much surprised me with Ron Holland there. So yeah, I see a little bit of Harrison Barnes in him, would probably be the biggest player comp that I can come up with here. But I am a Ron Holland believer. I have him as my number 2, so even a slot higher than you at 3. Mm-hmm. So I'll transition and go to my number 3 here. And before I bounce it back to you, that's the guy that's getting a little 1-pick buzz lately. I'm a little skeptical, more so than most, and it is Zachary Richier, is I believe how you say that one. We are getting thrown at with some of these names this year, but with him specifically, he's another guy that is playing overseas that makes it a little bit difficult. Averaged 11.1 points per game, shot 38.7% from 3 this year, actually over 47% this year specifically when shooting, which is absurd numbers from beyond the arc there. The footwork, the shot form, it does look like it's going to translate from my eyes, but to be honest, I'm a little skeptical that might be it with him, that there's a lot of belief in kind of the creation off the dribble for him, running in the fast break, creating in transition. And you certainly see flashes of it, but I'm just not as sold on the long term when speaking about him as a whole. Also, when having like the three-pointer conversation as a whole, yes, he cut the twine at a high level this year, but he shot just 34% last year and was also 65% on free throw attempts. this does feel a little bit to me like a case like we're being a prisoner of the moment, that this guy has had a red hot shooting form. And I was listening to some of the guys watch him go through some of these shooting routines where it is just the drill work side of things. And while he looks solid, it wasn't a guy that gave kind of the aura of this is an absolute laser lockdown shooter. And that does concern me there. Also, he at the rim finishing shot just 37.9% in last year's season. He did improve that up to 51.3% this year, but that's still not great numbers that you want around the rim there. He does need to add some weight to his body. That I do think frame is certainly a part of this conversation here. So I have him locked at number 3 and a little bit behind Ron Holland in my mind because of that.
Yeah, 2 points to what you were saying. One, with the shot creation, I saw, I think it was either on Twitter or it was on YouTube, but it was basically just cut-ups of him trying to create and getting stopped, whether it was just good defense or guys just beating him to a spot and just being more muscular than him, and he's kind of just throwing up, crap at the rim, where, that hurts that field goal percentage that you were talking about as well. And then 2, I think that is probably the silver lining to, I guess, some of these players right now, and why they might be rising, is because they're actually still playing basketball. Like some of these guys, like I know, I'll just throw out a name, Justin Edwards. He hasn't played since March 19th or something. Sure, he went out and played a couple of scrimmages. These guys have been playing full swing season. So you're just watching more and more live basketball and probably getting more impressed. And credit to him, he's playing his best basketball at the right time. He's probably made himself a few $1 million and potentially – I think I saw the Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer released a mock draft today, and he was the number 1 pick in the latest draft. So if they're buying into maybe like, all right, this guy's starting to figure it out, sure. Or you could just be playing really well at the right time and kind of got that a little bit of motivation there to get the bag. But I'm not really buying him. He's on in my top 5 to spoil the rest of my list, but I don't even know if he would crack the honorable mention for me. It's like nothing really kind of sticks out supremely besides being able to shoot the ball, but also, benefit of the doubt for me, at least, haven't watched a handful of Zachary Reisler, or however you pronounce his name.
Yeah, and a couple more comments, like the finishing around the rim for the most part, I don't think it's a touch issue with him. I think it's more of the shot selection and decision making that I saw a lot of, like wildly out of control attempts, or where he took too far out trying to avoid a defender, trying to do something complicated, kiss it off the glass. That to me is more of like a processing the game, and I think that's easier to fix than if it were a touch issue. I do believe in the shot, that the way he can run off pin downs, that he is a movement shooter, which is incredibly appealing to me. I've seen a lot of Michael Porter Jr. comparisons for him. I think that's reaching a little high for him. And this sounds even more insulting than I mean it, but I see some like Davis Bertans in his game. And let's not forget, like there was a period of time where Bertans was an impact player in the NBA and caught himself quite a bit of money because of it. That's kind of the archetype that I see him coming, that he is just going to be a pure shooter. I need to see a lot more from him, but he's still very young, still 18 years old, or 19 years old. I'm sorry. So a guy that has plenty to grow in. And my last note is he's got some T-Rex arms as well. Measured at 6'8", 6'7" wingspan. Never want to see a negative wingspan, especially for a wing defender. There's very few of those guys. I believe Filipowski is another guy in this draft that has the same issue. But like that to me, I think sometimes people read into too much, but still something to note when projecting their defensive potential.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons we were talking yesterday too. One of the reasons why I hate throwing out player comps. Like you could say what you want about Michael Porter Jr., but if you say that you're getting Michael Porter Jr. with this guy, you're getting a top. He's a top 5, no doubt, pick in this draft.
Yeah,
Michael,
absolutely.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but Michael Porter Jr. is a max contract player, right?
It might be a hair under, but he's making like 40+ million. Yes.
Yeah, I mean his stats right here. He's shooting 41. Shoots 41% from 3 for his career and averages 16 points a game, and so 6.6 rebounds. Like in this draft, especially, that guy's a top 5, no doubt, lock. So you're telling me that when you see this guy in the NBA, that's what he's going to be. Like I'm not feeling that convinced as well, and that's like the real shitty part about throwing out these player comps too, because even yesterday when I was kind of talking about Tyler Kolek a little bit, I'm like, all right, well, if I think that he even has a chance to potentially be a Jalen Brunson, why am I not taking him number 1 overall in this class? Like Jalen Brunson probably proved that he's a top 10, 15 player in the league. So throwing out the player comps gets like hairy at times, but I guess you kind of have to do that to help mold a better picture of some of these players. But it's just it can be a little bit frustrating at times.
Yeah, it is amazing how every player is so unique and that there are different characteristics for everybody. So you had Ron Holland as your number 3. Who do you have as number 2?
Number 2, It's weird because this is predominantly a football conference. When you think of the SEC, you think of football, but I think I watched more SEC basketball this year specifically than ever. And Dalton Connect, every time I watched him, was a thrill to watch. And I think he's going to be a hell of an NBA player. The 6'6" guard out of Tennessee. I think you go out of any player in this entire draft class, the most NBA ready player to go play in the NBA finals this week, if you needed to take one guy out of this class, would be Dalton Connect.
Yeah.
He's going to get talked about as a high level shooter, no doubt about it. But I think he's a super athlete as well. Several times this year, catching lobs above the rim, throwing down dunks, coming off the baseline. He's a really good athlete, and he's obviously not going to get talked about that in the biggest extent because he's such a good shooter as well. But he averaged 21.7 points per game for Tennessee this year after transferring from Northern Colorado. So he came from JUCO to Northern Colorado to Tennessee to dominating the SEC, being the SEC Player of the Year, winning the SEC regular season at Tennessee. And he really ignited kind of an offensive system that over the past 3 or 4 years, it was like, all right, the only way Tennessee is going to beat you is kind of football style. We're gonna beat you up. We're gonna beat you on the glass, and we're really going to defend. Tennessee basically said, Dalton, take over, and take over he did. He was just an awesome, dynamic scorer in college basketball this year. Had 13 games this season with 25 or more, 10 games with 4 or more threes, and he dropped 37 on North Carolina, 39 on Auburn, 40 on Kentucky, and 37 on Purdue. So the dude was a monster this season. He had his best performances, arguably, against the best teams, the best competition. Going up above the rim, like I said, ripping threes from deep. He shot 39.7% from deep. Once again, I think that is not being talked about enough, how well he shot transitioning from such a lower level like Northern Colorado to the SEC. That gives me more faith that this will even translate more to the NBA as well. He isn't going to be much of a playmaker. He isn't going to be an elite defender, but I think he can hold his own. He's just a real viable scoring option and a damn safe pick in this class. Reminds me a lot of Kevin Huerter. I think that's my best kind of comparison for him, but I'm all in on Dalton Connect. And once again, with what I was saying about Kolek and Brunson, I wouldn't be mad if I'm the Hawks and they go out there and they would pick him, because I just know he's going to be. I think he's a slam dunk pick in this draft.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you that I've been surprised how much Dalton Connect has continued to rise up my board, and that's why I have him as my number one wing in this year's draft class as a whole. And by the way, with like Connect specifically, I think it should be a lesson of how everyone's path is different. That this is a dude who spent 2 years at JUCO, that I was reading up a little bit about it, just how like he was basically a late bloomer, that he was 6'3" entering college, shot all the way up to about 6'6" right now. He was even like 5'6", like entering late into his high school years.
Freshman year in high school, he was 5'6".
Yeah, like, and that's crazy that this guy now we're now talking about as a legitimate NBA draft prospect. That like everyone's path is a little different, and it's cool to see with Connect specifically, he's taken his game to new heights as he stepped up to the level of competition. That at JUCO he was just fine. Then he transferred to Real Deal Division I, and he ended up looking better, even better there in that location. Then he transferred to the SEC, to Tennessee, which was a massive leap in competition, and just took all his numbers even further and even higher up, which is incredible stuff there. And it would not shock me when he reaches the NBA that there's more to be untapped there. That I think he's that level of late bloomer that it should not scare people that he is 23 years old. He measured in officially at 6'5", 0.3 inches there, 6'9" with the wingspan, which was bigger than I anticipated there. You mentioned everything with the stats. The movement shooter is the number one for me. That like when you have this guy on the floor, there's always an option to just run him off a screen. You have a 3-pointer, and that's a pretty good percentage shot based on what he's going to knock it down. I do believe that fully translates to the NBA level. The biggest concern is for sure on the defensive side of the floor. I thought even in college, there were situations in which teams were circling him and trying to attack him. He does have size, but he doesn't move particularly well laterally. I do think that's something that he's going to have to address. And frankly, we see how the NBA works and what especially teams like the Dallas Mavericks, where they're going to circle whoever that weak spot on the defense is and take him one-on-one. Connect's going to have to prove that he can at least hang. He's never going to be this plus all defensive team guy, but you just got to be passable, and there will be a long career for him. But I'm absolutely with you that I think he's cut a little bit from like the Klay Thompson type mold, something like that. That's obviously a high bar that I'm setting, but I think he's that level of shooter and did it at some really high volume at Tennessee as well. So I'm all in on Connect and have him as my number one wing.
But you also go back to what you just said about Klay Thompson. Klay Thompson was what, the 11th pick? Like, no one saw him becoming arguably one of the top 5 greatest shooters in NBA history. So, I mean, that's just a crazy part of the draft, because if you did think that, you would probably take him number one overall. Like it's just wild kind of how this entire process works. And to what you were saying about him on the defensive end, I think too, where you have to kind of take into account, he was basically said like Tennessee's offense was either Dalton Connect balls out and we win, or he struggles and we lose. So he had so much weight on his shoulders on the offensive end where at times he probably wasn't giving full maximum effort on defense. He's not going to be asked to do as much on the offensive end, I think, in the NBA. So maybe he kind of improves a little bit there, and he definitely makes himself more of a overall kind of 3-and-D type player. But
Yeah.
I don't think it's like an effort thing or an overall whelming athleticism. I do think, like you said, laterally his speed isn't that great. He's more of like a vertical athlete more so. But I think he's as close in this draft as you can get to a slam dunk.
Yeah, I actually do think he is pretty athletic vertically. Like he's a guy that will catch a lob. And by the way, he plays with like a level of intensity that's pretty rare too. Like you'll see him being fired up, trying to dunk on people, smacking his chest, all those types of things, which I love to see. But it is that like lateral slide with guys that when you're getting hit with a crossover, can you stick with a guy? That I do have some doubts there. And I don't think it will be an effort thing either, but that almost is more of a concern to me that it might just like not be there. He's not the level of a guy like we're talking about like Rob Dillingham, where I just don't think it's possible for him to defend. Maybe Connect can get there, but I just don't think it is right now. So we'll see. The bottom line is the shooting is worth taking the chance on in my mind. But who do you have as your number one wing in this year's draft class?
Yeah, so my number one wing, I think what I was just saying about Dalton Connect, where he's probably my favorite, player guy that I could just throw into a game tomorrow. I think Donovan Clingan and Reed Shepard are in that conversation as well. But if we're talking overall prospect, I think this is my favorite prospect in the draft, and the guy I think when you look back 3 or 4 years from now, he could be the best overall player. And that's Matas Buzelis out of the G League Ignite. 6'10", long, and he's got some serious springs in his legs. We were just talking about Connect. But when you watch Buzelis at times, like he gets up there like head scratchers on the rim. Just makes some plays on tape that a few guys in this class, I think, do that just kind of make you go, wow, when he has the ball in his hands. I think he has a really good blend of craftiness, athleticism, and some overall dog in him. He's got a great motor, and I think at times he shows the willingness and the kind of confidence to be like, give me the ball and get out of the way, and he's going to go make a play, whether it's for better or worse. Especially as a really young player, you like to see that because there's something that either they'll learn to tone down or they'll just continue to get better with. Similar to Holland with the G League Ignite, where efficient overall shooting from the field, 44%, pretty solid there, but struggled from three, only shooting 27%. I think he's good enough, like I was saying with Holland as well, where and athletic enough where even if he only shoots 30 to 33%, he could still have a pretty long-term role in the NBA. Might not be the best player in the class if the shooting doesn't pan out, but still a very solid 10 to 12-year NBA career, I think, if he's just, a below average three-point shooter. Rebounded well, too, at about 7 rebounds per game, and while he only averaged 1.9 assists per game, he still showed, I think, some good flashes of ability as a playmaker. I think he's got some playmaking savvy to him. 2.1 blocks per game, too. His leaping ability, like I said, the springs in his legs, really impressive. And I think he had some good value there as a defender. Another player that's still only 19 years old. And I've seen the Denny Avia comps getting thrown around for him. I think that those are pretty fair. But I do think he has a higher ceiling. So a player that was, I think, really hard to put an overall comparison comp on. I've seen Lamar Odom thrown out there as well for him. But this is a player that I'm really high on, and I think long-term could be the best player to come out of this draft.
Yeah, I am a Matas believer and probably should have had him on this list here. I think in my mind, I had him a little bit more towards the big man archetype, but I'm with you that I can see him translating to being a wing. As far as my kind of comparison, I think Franz Wagner is the number one guy that jumped out to me when I watched him for where I see his game translating. He's also, Matas is absolutely a guy that like is going to be mentally ready for it from day one, that he's been a top recruit for his entire lifetime, lived in Chicago most of his life, that despite the name and kind of a lot of the foreigners that we're seeing this year's draft, this is an American kid that is family's from overseas, but he's lived in the United States for the duration of his life, has gone through all these same kind of camps that all these top prospects do when you go through the American route. So Matas is a guy that's going to be ready, and I was really impressed. I know I've brought this up before, but at the Rising Stars game, watching him go head to head with like actual NBA players, like talking about Benedict Mathurin and Jaden Ivey and guys like that, it was Matas that was backing guys down, chirping a little bit, wanting the big shot. And that was pretty cool to me to see. Like that did leave an impression on me, just seeing the way that he handled himself, that he wanted the big moment. And he even was the guy like calling for the ball with the game on the line as they were doing the Elam ending there. So I really liked seeing that. That did stick with me. And once again, with kind of the G League Ignite conversation, I think that we see the flaws in the structure of this, and we've seen the lack of success with some of these guys, or at least not having them prepared for day one from the NBA. The end of the day, look at each player as an individual, look at them as a prospect, and don't think twice when talent's staring you right in the eye. So I think that applies to both Ron Holland and Matas, but I do like him for the number one shout there out of you.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm really curious to see where he goes. I think the Pistons would be a good fit for him there too.
I like that. So before we get out of here, you want to recap real quick, rip through your top five real quick, and then we can bounce?
Yep. So Justin Edwards at number 5, Harrison Ingram number 4, Ron Holland at 3, Dalton Knecht at 2, and Matas Buzelis at 1. And just a couple honorable mention guys on the wing that I think are going to have some pretty impactful careers. Ryan Dunn out of Virginia. His defense is that good where I think no matter what happens on the offensive end, he's going to find a role in this league. The offensive ceiling certainly could be limited, but I think he's worth a pick in the second round and a guy that you could throw in for 10 to 12 minutes and play some really good defense, some of these elite NBA wings. And a player that was played at a smaller school throughout his time in college at Weber State, but Dylan Jones. He was an impressive guy, and a few times that I watched Weber State over the past couple of years. So keep an eye out on him. Maybe doesn't get drafted, but maybe as an undrafted two-way guy.
Yeah, I like that. And I'm out on Ryan Dunn from the standpoint of I think he might be like less offensively talented than Matisse Thybulle, which is really saying something there. And we've seen the Ben Simmons and the Matisse Thybulle experience here in Philadelphia. I just don't know how you can hide him offensively. I think it might be too much. I do think there are situations where a team should absolutely take a chance on him. It better not be the Sixers, and just a little too many concerns there for me. But to recap mine real quick, I have Tristan da Silva at number 5, Tijan Salon at number 4, Zachariah Richier at number 3, Ron Holland at number 2, and Dalton Knecht at number 1. And I'm also happy that we did not get into the Cody Williams discussion. I keep trying to be a Cody believer, and I just can't get there. I just don't see it with him, and he will be a guy that I'll be watching out for how his career projects. And then any final thoughts, Ryan?
No, that's it. Just continuing on with our player profile series. I think, like we said, we'll probably be able to get to, between the two of us, 50 or so. So, yeah, a few more weeks and excited to get into some more of these prospects a little deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. So keep it locked for all of that. Make sure you are dropping a follow or a subscribe wherever you are watching at. Dropping a like to let us know you're visiting right here on Pick Swap Media. We'll be back through the duration of the draft process and everything else beyond. So appreciate you guys for tuning in. Talk to you next time.